All right, folks. Hi, and welcome to episode 3 of Inside Laravel. Today we are going to be covering, at the very least, configuration. So, just as a reminder, the first episode we went over the request lifecycle, looked at the kernel, we looked at routing, we looked at middleware and pipelines. The last episode, which was last week, we did service container, so we looked at binding and resolving and service providers and facades and things like that. I'm not sure we got through everything there, so I may go back and... Too hot. Is that better? I actually think I might have turned the gain up. There we go. It's probably better. Okay. Okay, cool. And so this week we are going to look at configuration and potentially managers. So I think that configuration is going to be a fairly short topic, but I'm not entirely sure. So we'll take a look and see how that goes. And then if we have time, we'll jump into managers. Otherwise, we'll cover that next week. So I guess let's start actually with sort of how configuration is defined, and then we'll talk about like how it actually works. So as you can see here, we have our configuration directory, and in here we have a bunch of files, and each one of these follows the same format, right? So they just return an array, and so this is something in PHP that a lot of people don't realize, which is that you can return a value from a file, and when you include or require that file, then the result of that statement is actually this value, right? So if I were to just do include, wow, that is not how you type, dollar value equals require auth.php, then the contents of val here will be this array over in the value in the auth PHP, right? So nothing magical, nothing special there. Now, the best practices in Laravel are to only call env within your configuration files and to bind all environment variables to configuration variables, because once you cache the configuration, which you should be doing in production, and really only production, it should, env will no longer return the value that you expect, if anything. And so env takes the name of the environment variable and then a default, and ultimately what ends up happening is all of these files get munched together into the configuration, which is accessed through the config helper or the config facade. So let's just take a quick look at like what this configuration looks like. So let's just jump into Tinker, and if I run config, I actually think this will return, yeah, the repository. But if I run config app, you can see that we get all the application stuff. And each one of these files can be accessed. So if I do, let's take a look at a quick one. Let's take, not cache, let's see here. Let's take services. This one's pretty small by default. So if we run config services, we get back that array, right? Now, obviously, with these, environment variables, replaced with the actual values, which a lot of them are empty because I don't have them set. And the goal here is that you just create a static sort of PHP file, and where that will end up is in your bootstrap. So let's just go ahead and exit out of this, and we will do a artisan config cache. So that's with a clear cache. And if we come over here, we now have this config.php. This is static. And essentially, we can see these arrays that live under here. So here's the app array. Here is the auth array. We'll go down to services. Q services, right? So here's the services array that we were just looking at. Interestingly, it's in long format, probably because var export is being used. If I remember correctly, if you do a var export of a short array, it will turn it into a long array. Yeah, so that's almost certainly what's happening there. So we'll find that. We'll look into that. But ultimately, this is the file that would be included rather than pulling in all of these files with all of that I/O. So what? By default, we have 8, 10 config files. It's a lot of file I/O. And of course, not just that. It's also talking to the environment using env, or ultimately get env underneath that. Also is doing I/O. So just quite heavy. So that's kind of all that config cache does. And of course, anytime that you run artisan config clear, all it's going to do is delete that file. So that is now gone. And I do recommend actually using caching your config during testing if you can. It's going to be a lot faster. We saw at a previous company a fairly significant performance increase caching the config during test runs, but it depends. On the local developer laptop, that's a little harder sometimes. Certainly, once you get to your CI environment, you very often have a fairly static config. But yeah. Is a recording of the previous service container stream available somewhere? Absolutely. So if you go to my Twitch page and look, sorry, can hear myself. Where do we go? Should be in here somewhere. It's definitely on the Twitch page. Here we go. Yeah, okay. So under videos, you can see my recent broadcasts. And I will add that to the Inside Laravel stream shortly. So, yeah, they are available there. I don't know how long Twitch keeps them, but my plan is ultimately to clean these up and create a sort of more produced version as well. Okay, so getting back to config. So let's take a look. So I think most people's sort of experience with config is through that config helper. So let's just take a look at that. So we're actually this is the code from the last time. That's fine. So let's just do app dot env. So that would be local. Let's take a look inside of the config function. So very first thing it does is it checks to see if the key is null. If it is, then it just returns the config from the service container. So that's why we were seeing in our tinker here, when we run config, we do get that repository, right? So that is just a repository that contains the config. And we should be able to actually pull the config out. I think we do like all. There we go. There's all of that same stuff that was in the config file, right? That config.php that gets saved with config cache. So if I just do service, yep, there we go. There's our services config right there. So that's how that first part works. Then it checks if it's an array, then it's going to set it. That is interesting. If it's an array, okay, yeah. So let's take a look at this. So for each keys as key value. So in theory, then we can config test. Let's do app.test, and we'll just set that to foo. And now I should be able to do app.test, and there's foo back, right? So I actually didn't know that was a feature. That's pretty cool. Nice little easy way to do that. And then lastly, if it's neither of those things, then it's go ahead and call get on that repository, passing through the key and the default. So let's jump into that now. So get, if it's an array, so interestingly, while config, when it's an array, will do a set, get itself also accepts an array, and we'll call get many. We'll get to that in a minute. We'll take a look at that. But otherwise, it will call the ARR, the array helper, get on this items, which presumably is the that is protected. So I don't know if we can. Let's see if we can take a look at that real quick. We'll just dump config, and I think that will show it. Dump config, yeah. So yeah, that's just our config, essentially, as an array in memory inside of this repository. And it will call the key, and then it has default. So ultimately, this whole like default mechanism just falls down into the array helper supporting that. So we'll look at that a little bit more in a little bit. I want to take a look at this get many because I'm actually curious about this. So it's going to sort of produce, I assume, like a slice of array configs, or of config, sorry. So I wonder if maybe we can, let's see here. Let's just pull like the view config and the services config at the same time. So config, we need to call get, right? It can't be the, it can't be the config helper, otherwise it will set it. And I think that this is the format it's wanting. Yeah, so that's actually really neat. That's a nice way to like pull out a fair amount of config all at once. And what I think that means is that you would be able to do something like, let's just like try and get like the SES config, right? So let's say that the constructor I don't want to interrupt, but for some reason I can see a first stream recording in your account. Cannot find the second one. I'll double check. I think it might be that you're only seeing the second one because I thought they were only kept for 7 days. That was my recollection of the config. So that one might be the service container one. As I said, I have the recordings locally, so I will maybe put them on YouTube or something. So let's take a look. Let's try and let's pull in like the key, the services.ses.secret, and the services. And I know that these aren't set, but like we should still be able to get them. My expectation is that we'll get like an array. Oh, interesting, with the keys in it. My hope is that you'd be able to spread them, right? So what I mean by that is function. Oh, yeah, $A dot, right? That was my hope. Oh, I should actually make it actually dump it. That's what I meant to do. Dump $args. What we should actually see here is those keys, yeah, getting dumped. That won't work with named args, which is a little frustrating. So you'd end up having to call like array values on that if you just wanted to like put them in as non-named arguments, right? But that's an interesting way to call the config and pull out multiple things at a time. All right, so that is that. And yeah, it's just creating this sort of temporary config variable, looping over the keys, and you can set a default for each of them. That actually is really nice. Let me, well, hang on, how does it know? Oh, okay, right. So if the key is numeric, then it sort of creates this new array where it sets the key to the default, which is the actual config key, and default to null. That's quite nice, and then it will get it. So let's sorry, I do actually want to try this. So We'll set this to foo, this one to bar, and we'll leave the other one alone. That didn't do what I expected it to. Oh, because I called array values, I think. Let's just see what happens here. Oop, there. That is interesting. It should, as I understand it, do they all need? They don't. Why doesn't that work? If the key is numeric, I wonder if that's cached in some way. It definitely, it's the key and then default is the value. Let me try pulling something else. Let's try like app.name. Well, that's definitely going to have a value, isn't it? Services dot resend dot, what is that? Key. And we'll set a default. That is interesting. I wonder why that doesn't work. Let's debug that. I think we'll have to exit and start over. So we're going to try this one. And, oh, right, yep, sorry. I need to cancel that. Sail bash php id config equals server name equals localhost. And then, oh no, PHP artisan tink. Did that? Yeah, I did. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's see here. So key is not numeric, which means, and default is foo. I wonder why it doesn't fall back to the default. Ah, it only has to exist. No? Okay. Okay, so then we explode through the segments. Yeah, it's, for some reason, I think because the key exists, it's setting it to the empty string, which I guess is a valid value, right? So maybe if they were null, it wouldn't do that. Let's just try that. Config set services.ses key null. And we'll just let this run. No, it's still getting that. So that's interesting. So let's just try and get something that doesn't exist at all. Services.ses.foo. We'll set that to that. And this time, yeah, so the key cannot exist at all, which is a little frustrating, honestly. I would expect empty values to return defaults as well. If I'm not mistaken, services.ses.region, oh, hang on, key. Yeah, that returns null. But like env, I don't think, like app, I don't know what I haven't got set. Hold on. No, I guess that's the same behavior, right? So if it's defined in here, like let's try cache prefix. That's actually a really good one. That one, because that exists but doesn't have a value. Doesn't return anything, which is correct, I think, based on what's in the file. And presumably, if I do this now, yeah, now we get foo. Okay, so if it is defined at all, you don't get the default. I wish it was the default on empty-ish values, right? Obviously not something that's going to change. Something to be aware of. I think quite important that we recognize that. All right, so let's go back to our code here. So we were in get many. We're going to get rid of that here. Get, and I guess we already jumped into array get. Yeah, what's this now? What does value do? Oh, okay. If it's a closure, then it evaluates it. Okay. Yeah, I don't think there's much more to config, right? So, I guess the last piece is where does it get like created? That's what I last would like to look at. So we're gonna look there. We're gonna start, as I frequently do, in the index.php. So we'll look into the bootstrap configure. So it's either going to be in the constructor, which I don't. I mean, it could be part of here. Let's look for the container registry somewhere in our code. Where's the repository? Sorry. This is the facade. Load configuration. That looks useful. Excuse me, 1 second. About that, didn't want to sneeze in y'all's ear. All right, so yes, this is where the repository is registered. So where does this get called? In the kernel. Okay. So it is either in the bootstrappers or what's this other? There's two. What? Oh, there's two different kernels, right? So this is the console kernel, and this is the HTTP kernel. So either way, it's going to use the same configuration thing, and presumably bootstrap with, where's this get called? Current method. Okay, so just I'll kind of step back a little bit and show how we get here. So in the index, I believe in handle request, which is on the application container, handle request, in one of these two functions, let's make sure it's not here. Yeah, I think it was. Handle request. Send request through router is called here, and I believe that's where we just saw it. Yeah, bootstrap. So for each of the bootstrappers, it is going to dispatch an event and then make the bootstrap and then call the bootstrap function, which then leads us back over to the load configuration bootstrap function, right? So, and then we can see here. So If the file exists, whatever the cached config file, then it just sets items by requiring that file, and then apparently sets a config loaded from cache. That's interesting. We can resolve that out of the container. Just sets it to true. Yeah. So hold on. Let's PHP artisan config cache. What would it be? Was it in the config? No, it's the container, right? So we should be able to resolve that. So that's true. And if we go ahead and clear that config, presumably that will now be false. It doesn't have anything in there. That's interesting. So it's either set and true or not set at all. And it doesn't return there. The only difference is, let's see. Oh, that's actually a little bit, I guess it's an is set, so it's not going to error. Personally, I would have set this to false above, and then get rid of this is set call. Like, this is completely unnecessary, and it's kind of overhead we don't need. It's a micro optimization to be sure, but that's certainly just the way I would have done it. So yeah, next we'll spin through all the configuration files. So it will create an instance of the repository in the service container, also assigning it to config at the same time. This is a pattern that I continue to see, like we see it here in Laravel, that I'm not a huge fan of. And then if it isn't loaded from the cache, it will load the configuration files. And presumably what that is doing, let's see here. Where does items get used? Oh, it's the default value, right? So, oh, that's interesting. So if you, I'm trying to think of a situation where you would end up. I don't think you would end up in this situation, but it is possible to create a repository with like a default set of values and then load configuration files on top of that, by the looks of this. So let's go into load configuration files. This is going to loop over the config path and find each of the files, and it will do nested, which is nice, and look for PHP files. There's probably under the hood here, there's probably a filter iterator. I would hope that's ultimately what that does. Yeah, file name filter iterator, perfect. If you're not familiar with iterators in depth, they are super, super powerful. The ability to nest iterators, in particular, filter iterators, regex iterators, iterators. There's a lot of cool stuff there. So that's neat. That's that implementation. It will sort them by the key. So that's also interesting. So I guess that means that ultimately they are going to be in this configuration. And then the other thing, as we know, is that like this is app.php, right? And there is no app key in here. This name is ultimately used for the key within the config. Sorry, I didn't go back to where I was. Where was I? Here. Okay. And I'm not sure if that is what's happening here, or if that's going to come up later. Oh, so there is a base config as well. What is that? Huh. I feel like this isn't, for the most part. Where are we at? This is gonna get the same set of files, which feels like a bit of a waste. honestly. But that's only if should merge is set. Okay, so I wonder where that is set. That's on the application instance. Let's find the application again. It defaults to true, so that may have something to do with the new Laravel 11 skeleton, the way that all works. Let's go back to where we were, which is here. Oh, and it also defaults to true. Yeah, if this doesn't exist, then it will default to merging. As I said, I'm not entirely sure where it's pulling that name from, because if what I saw in here, does base name allow you to strip a suffix? Oh, I didn't know that. That's actually really cool. So that is where it's happening. Base name. Huh. All right. Well, that's cool. I learned something today. Learned several things already. Okay, so that is where that's happening. It's creating this files directory where it's taking the base name of the file and stripping the .php. That is where we end up there. So it's doing an array diff and then ultimately setting the individual config keys. So each one will be the app, the auth, cache, etc. And this is then the base? What's happening here? Yeah, okay, so it's doing it for both of them. So this one will... Interesting, it looks like if it's in the base... I'm surprised that the base config, which is your non-custom config, is loaded after the Laravel, like after your own config, is the way that I read that. That is surprising to me. I must have that wrong, because that feels very incorrect. But ultimately, it'll go through both sets and just set them in the config. I guess the only way to concretely tell. To set only set if it's not in there, because often they have an add and a set, and set will only set if no. Interesting. Okay. Well, that is where it gets set. So just to kind of go back on that. So we have this load configuration bootstrapper, which is called in the where was it? Ultimately in the kernel, but by the request. Let's see, bootstrappers. Here we go. So in the kernel bootstrap, it will bootstrap it. Actually, that's the console one. I feel like that wasn't the case in the HTTP one. Is this the HTTP one? Yes. No, I guess it is. Okay. So that is, in short, config. Any questions or anything like that? Because if not, I'm going to move on to the manager pattern and how those work. This could ultimately end up being quite a short stream, because I also don't think that that is a very big thing either. Oh, I did want to cover environment. I want to look into that function. Yeah, let me do that. So let's take a look at the env function. So as I mentioned, once you cache, this function behaves differently. It isn't just like a pass through to PHP's getEnv. And I think part of that is support for env files, which are using the .env library by, I think, V. Lucas is the user there. So yeah, let's take a look at the env facade here. All right, so env just wraps env get, and I don't think that there's like a put version of this at all. There is inside of the env facade. It's not even a facade, I don't think. This is just a static class. So get will call get option with a key, and then get or call function value default. Okay, so we looked at this value before, right? So this can be a closure, which I find kind of interesting. That does mean that you could put a closure in here and have it return a dynamic value. But again, it's only during the initial caching phase that would get executed. So at least I would assume so. So that is something to be mindful of. Let's test that. I'm actually kind of curious. We should just be able to like literally that actually should do it. Oh, well, hang on. So let's add a dynamic value here. So now we'll just add the timestamp, right? So exit, we'll run that again, and so it should be config services .ses.key returns. Oh, maybe because I did that. Let's try that again. Do I have the config cached? I don't think so. Okay. That doesn't make sense to me. Is this defined? It is. Okay. Let me get rid of it from here. So that's what we were seeing earlier, right? Where if it is defined, interesting. Okay, so even just loading it up gives us the string. And what I'm curious about is if we get a different note, we get exactly. So that is done on console bootstrap, right? We saw that. That isn't surprising to me. And presumably, if I config cache, we might even see the dump. Yeah, right there. And if we go into Tink again, we should get that exact same timestamp. So yeah, only evaluated once, which is a little bit of a shame. It would be nice if you could have, for example, feature flag based config. So if a feature flag using, say, Pennant is enabled or disabled, then the config could reflect that. But that is what it is. That's fine. I'm going to put that back so I don't lose it. Let's go back to the env file here. Okay, so option from value. So it's going to get the repository, which presumably is the repository builder, create with default adapter. Oh, it's returning the .env repository, it looks like. and then it will get the key. And then, so when do we get the... There's got to be a call to get env in here somewhere, right? There isn't. Must be part of maybe this. I think by default it uses the put env adapter. Yeah, there's our call to get env. Okay, going back to the env file. Okay, so it's going to get the value, falling back to... So it'll go through the .env file. If it doesn't exist there, then it will fall back to... Well, hang on, is that correct? It might take the server, and I believe it does. We'll take the server environment first. We can also test that, right? So if we just set that config file variable, right, which I'm sure many people have done this. So if I just take this one, right, so it's defined here. We know that right now it would return an empty string. But if we instead call this and get it, because I cached it, sorry. Let me get rid of the cache. Yeah, so I think that's expected behavior. I don't think anyone is confused by that. And that, sorry, is over here in the put env adapter, so it's going to get it by the name. Surprising to me is that it isn't... I wonder if there's like an array of these things. I don't think so. It doesn't look like it's going to. I don't know if any of these other ones will... Well, there's an easy way to check this. So we'll just go into php.env, get env, and see where it exists. So the Apache adapter or the put env adapter. So it's we definitely know we're in here. What I was looking for is where it falls back essentially to the .env file. There's two sets of fallbacks, right? So it's going to check the system environment, the process environment, I should say. If it doesn't exist there, then it will check the .env file. And if it doesn't exist there, it will fall back to the default value that you put in the env call, right? I'm not sure where that is happening, if I'm being quite honest. We can dig into that. We can debug that. I'm curious about this from value though. If value equals none value, so the value which should... Oh, interesting. So null by default. And there isn't a way to really pass a null at this point. Like, not a real null. From value. Yeah, so it's only if .m doesn't find it would a null be returned. And then we end up with this none value. This is there's a word for it. An optional would be, I think, the Swift way of doing it. All right, so assuming that we don't get a none, then we're going to map the value. and I find it, this is a option or sum. So it's an iterator, even though it only has one value normally. It could be an array, but none of those would match these things, so that's fine. Interestingly, there's no default in this case statement, so it doesn't do anything. And then what does this pattern do? I'm just going to toss this into regex 101. It's a great tool if you're not familiar with it. Asserts a position at the start of the string. Match a single character. Okay, so if it's quoted. Yeah, okay, so if it's a quoted value is essentially what that does. So this one will refer to this capture group. Okay. Okay, so it unquotes. That is what that is doing. So the second capture group is everything between the quotes, right? So just breaking this down. So I don't know why it's not written like this. The exact same thing, but ultimately we are matching a single or a double quote, then we're matching anything else, and ultimately ending in the whatever it was here. So whether it was single or double quote, it will end in the same thing. What's interesting to me is this is not non-greedy, which I'm surprised at. Actually, does that make sense? It would allow us to... Yeah, it allows us to have the single quote inside by being non-greedy. If I do it this way, then I believe it would capture differently. Well, no, because the $sign is there. Under slash... No, it doesn't change anything. Yeah, so greedy will change the behavior without that end terminator there, which is interesting. But otherwise, it just doesn't matter because it's going to capture, like, it needs to. This character here, the whichever quote it is, needs to be right at the end of the string. So yeah, that's interesting. And if you don't quote correctly, like this, you'll notice it doesn't match anything. And if that isn't a match, then it will just return the value. So it would return this kind of weird double quote, but not quite quoted string, right? And of course, I can wrap that whole thing in double quotes. So it'll just work fine. So it's a pretty nice regex and pretty simple. Otherwise, it just returns the value, right? Which could be an option or a sum. So let's go back to the get option. I think it was here. Yeah, this is the get call. Well, hang on. Sorry, I want to go back into that a moment. Map. It's going to map the value inside of this iterator, right? So it's always ultimately, this is going to return the option or sum. You don't return the true, false, or null or whatever directly. Well, I mean, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so going back to, sorry, not there. I'm going to go back to the get. So we're going to get option, get. Okay, so get or call. So what this is going to do then is it's going to call that value. And I guess depending on which of these two is going to depend on what it does. So for some, it will just return this value. Let's go back to here. And for option, Oh, that's just a closure. Oh, so it could, yeah, it could be none. Does this extend? So yes, this could be returned because it would return option or sum, right? So none is valid here. And so this will just call it. So going back to wherever that is, oh, that's not quite where I want to be. This is a getter call. So it's always going to call function. So that's actually quite nice. That is how we get back to the default. It will either get the value out of the iterator, which is this option, which would be a sum instance, or it's a none instance, which will always call this closure, which just calls value, which then calls, this closure if this is a closure as well. So that is pretty cool. All right, so that's how the env stuff works. Great. All right, I'm going to take a moment to drink some water, and then I will move on to give you a moment to ask questions or anything if you want in the chat, and then I will move on to managers. And we are back. Thank you for bearing with me. All right, so what do I mean when I talk about managers? So I'm going to go back to my README here so I can see exactly what I plan to cover. And it is essentially this. So anytime that you use a feature in Laravel that has like an adapter type pattern where you can choose the implementation based on the service that you want to use. So that can be storage, that can be queues, that can be caching, that can be logging, sort of database, but that happens differently, I believe. And maybe the DB facade does it, and then Eloquent just sits on top of that. But that is the manager pattern in Laravel. And managers are a really great way for injecting services into your code from the service container, and having like a configurable backend behind it. That is the way that you want to do that. So I think some of us try to instead use interfaces for this purpose, and then kind of resolve that interface to a concrete implementation. That is possible, but has some issues. I think notably the main one being that when your provider is called, your config may not be available. I think that's the one I've run into before. But ultimately, the correct way to do it is using a manager. So we can go ahead and take a look at sort of some of the default managers. So if we go to Logger, this should ultimately, let's do storage actually, because I think that one's maybe better. Here's the storage facade, and it is using under the hood file system. This one probably. Well, no, this is, what is this? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to my place where I seem to put all my code, and we will just use storage disk S3, right? So that's how you change the driver, is calling this disk method, which is here. And what this is doing then is calling, either you're passing in a name, or you are calling get default driver. And get default driver is looking in the config to find the default file system. And so this is the pattern, is you have some sort of function for setting which adapter that you want to use, which driver you want to use, and it will call get default driver, which will default to something in the config or just a hard-coded value, right? We could just default this to like files system, right? File is what it is, whatever it is. Can I go to that file systems? Here we go. Default, right? So local could be default, could be hard-coded. We don't want it. Certainly Laravel doesn't want to do that. For us, when we implement a manager, it could absolutely do that. So all of these things use this pattern. So that could be, going back to my app service provider, log, was it driver? Yeah, so the most common one is driver. Disk is just, I think, a little nicer, which is why they use that. What other ones did I say there were? So Q, here, not driver, but what is the name of the one we want to set here? Well, let's take a look at get default driver and see where it is called. Connection, right? So connection. And if we jump into that, we can see it's the same pattern of get default driver, which is going to look at the config Q default. Otherwise, it will check to see if the connection is set already, or it will try to resolve it, right? So this is the pattern. It's really quite simple. There is no, like, well, there is this factory contract. There isn't like a manager contract. Interesting that this is just the connection. That's the queue, though. This is specific to the queue, which means you could build your own queue manager, which I think I've seen in one package. I think the PubSub queue, the Google Cloud PubSub queue that I used, might have done this, has replaced the queue manager entirely. But yeah, there isn't like a default contract. So there's no like manager contract. This is just a pattern that is used everywhere in Laravel. So yeah, there really isn't much to that, honestly. I don't want to talk about like these implementations. It really is just about that management contract. So what you would do then, if you wanted to use a manager, is you would inject the manager into your class that needs the thing, and then call the driver or connection or disk or whatever function sets the current implementation with some sort of config variable, right? So here in the app service provider, where I'm calling S3, I think more likely what you would do is something like config.filesystems.cloud, right? Maybe .driver or something. And you would call it that way instead. And so that is how you enable reuse of components that you build, and flexibility in the things that you build, is by having this pattern of some underlying object that is managed by something else. And again, we kind of got a little bit lost there in the facade, but this is the underlying file system manager, right? So ultimately, whenever you call drive, it calls disk, and sets the disk of that name to the value. And then whenever you call something else, so let's see here, like get, it's going to, it's getting the whole disk. Hang on, I want to get like a file or something. See if that exists in here. The other part of this pattern is the creators. And this is the manager, which is why we're not actually seeing those files, but those function calls. Is each whatever value you pass in should get resolved to a create and then the name of the thing. So there should be a create S3, driver here. So ultimately what happens is in the disk function here, when it calls get resolve, you should see that it should create here we go, create UC first driver. This is the function name, and it will go ahead and call that to resolve the thing. So ultimately what that means is that your manager will come down to, for the most part, some sort of function like disk or connection or driver that will, first of all, if no value is passed, call get default driver, and if a value is passed, it will look for a create blah driver function. There is a lot more happening in here. So like cloud will just do the default cloud stuff, which is a nice alias. Ultimately on the storage facade for the cloud driver, whatever you've set it at. So like you can set it to S3 or DigitalOcean Spaces or whatever. But that's kind of extraneous to the pattern. Mostly just what you want is that some way to set the adapter and a create blah driver function on top of the get default driver, which it will fall back to. So that is the entirety of the manager pattern. As I said, you would inject the manager itself into your calling code unless you make it a facade, which is very common in Laravel. Logging obviously has a manager under it. File system or storage rather has a manager under it. The queues have a facade with a queue manager under it, right? So that is a very common pattern in Laravel. You do not have to create a facade. You can just inject the manager where you would normally inject the concrete service and call your adapter function, that driver or connection or whatever function. So that is an option. I'm going to close up a whole bunch of stuff. And we still have quite a bit of time, so I'm actually going to move on to the next topic, which is queues, bus, and jobs. So this is actually one of my favorite topics, and we're not going to get through all of this, I don't think, because this is quite a large topic. Let me just see if there's anything else that makes sense to put in an hour. Because I could probably spend 4 hours on queues and the bus and jobs. So I want to make sure that I give that enough time, and I don't want to sort of preempt the next stream where I'm halfway through a topic and start there. And I don't want to rehash it either. So this stuff is quite tangential to queues. The scheduler is probably the next standalone piece. So maybe we'll skip forward to the scheduler. So when I talk about the scheduler, what I'm talking about is the cron type system in Laravel. So let me pull up the docs, because Laravel docs. Yes, I want to leave the page. Task scheduling, right? So we're talking about this. So let's make sure we're in the 11x docs. Yep. Within our console routes, we can schedule stuff, and essentially the way that it works is every minute, I believe is typically what they recommend, you would just call the scheduler. Where is that command? It's like schedule run or something, right? Schedule run? Yeah, there we go. So whenever you call that, what it's going to do is look at the schedule and figure out what should have run in the last minute. Does it actually tell you to run it? Yeah. I believe that it keeps track of the last run, so it doesn't have to be every minute. But this is a thing. This is interesting. So when subminute tasks are defined within your application, the schedule run command will continue running until the end of the current minute instead of exiting immediately. This allows the command to invoke all required subminute tasks throughout the minute. I think that might be fairly new, honestly. Let me see if I can find out when that was added. Subminute is there. 9. Yeah, so it looks like it was added in Laravel 10. So that's fairly new. And I think you have to be mindful of that, right? You're going to have a long-running process. Now, obviously, I think for most of us, when we do this type of scheduling, it's because these tasks take some time. That does also mean, though, that if you have in your schedule something that runs every 5 minutes because it takes 3 minutes to run, if it runs at the beginning of that scheduled execution, the sub-minute stuff is going to happen at the end. And I don't know if Laravel is smart enough to go, well, this took over a minute, so something, another schedule will have run in that time, and that will have handled it. I'm not entirely sure what happens there. Without overlapping might help, but that is a lock. So it is locked per command though, so maybe that's fine. All right, let's take a look into how the scheduler actually works. So we're going to go into our route console right here, and we're going to schedule call function echo hello world every minute, right? So super simple. I'm not sure we'll even see that output. This is new in Laravel 10, which I kind of Laravel 11. So we can call with schedule in the bootstrap to define the scheduled apps. I think I prefer them in the console.php. What you could do is actually, rather than put it in routes, maybe create a console schedule or a schedule.php or something and include it here. So it's not, because it does feel a little bit weird, honestly, in the routes file. But that's just kind of how it's always been, and I think I'm okay with that. All right, so let's actually see what this is doing. So first of all, we'll jump into the schedule. That extends the oh right, yeah, I didn't include the right one. Okay, I don't want that. Yeah, that's the one I want. why are we... This is something I've noticed in PHP Storm lately, is it sometimes just will not like allow me to import something. And I haven't quite figured it out. I don't know if it's because there's a global called schedule as well. But yeah, okay, so this is our schedule facade, which just returns the console schedule class, which is this class right here. Interestingly, it is macroable, which means that we could add extra functions to the schedule. And we are going to call. So that's this function right here. Okay. So it creates, it adds an event to the events array, and it creates a callback event, which takes the event mutex. So that is something we're going to look into. It's probably created here. Yep, in the constructor. So it checks whether it's bound. If it is, then it returns it, or it creates a cache event mutex. That is mutex, if you're not familiar, I believe stands for mutually exclusive, and it's what will be used, presumably, for the no overlapping stuff, ultimately. But there is other mutexes and things happening here, so not entirely sure what the event mutex versus the scheduling mutex is for. All right, so we're going to create a callback event. We're going to pass in the event mutex. The callback, which is the thing that we defined, we passed in, right? Any parameters, which defaults to an empty array, and the current time zone, which is determined in the constructor. And if I believe I saw that happening, where was that? Where? Oh, interesting. Schedule time zone. Oh, so you can set a time zone specifically for the schedule, which is separate from the app time zone. So you could set your application to, UTC, but run all of your scheduled commands in Eastern time zone because that is where your company is located. I'm not sure why you would want to do that, but it's nice that it's an option. Okay, is there anything else to that? And this is tap, which is, if I remember correctly, just calls the callback and passes in the value. So oops. So this function will get past that. Okay, so okay, yeah. And then schedule cache is whether, so I didn't realize there was a schedule cache driver. Okay, can we go to the cache config? It's not even defined here. So I suspect most people don't realize that, like, that is a thing that you can define. Yeah, that would be a top level key. Yeah, it's not even defined. I'm curious what the schedule cache ultimately does. So this is a schedule. Where's use cache? If event mutex instance of cache aware. Excuse me. Schedule use cache to schedule cache. Right. So that is just presumably a string. That's actually, sorry, an aside here. There was a change, I want to say in like Laravel 9, from using store to driver. And it was in other config files. I think maybe the database one was like DB store was the default, and then it moved to DB driver for specifying which database driver to use. What's interesting about this here to me is the use of the function. And the reason that you would do that is that this env call only gets evaluated if this doesn't exist. Which means that you ultimately save this call. Because like you could absolutely just do that. Yeah, just do that, right? Just nest them. But because of the way that PHP is evaluated, this would get called no matter what, even if this already exists. So the use of the closure there is actually really interesting, because this ultimately wouldn't get executed. I don't think there's a huge amount of overhead in defining the closure. Or at least they feel that it's less than calling env get, which, if you think about it, could be potentially like hitting I/O, at least like memory I/O, getting it from the system environment. That's just a really interesting pattern. I just want to call it out that maybe you want to use in your code. So when you this is using the env facade, but it could just be calling the env, like we know that that's an alias for it, right? So if you are doing fallbacks like this from one environment variable to another, using a function to do that, using a closure to do that, might be a more efficient way to do that. Sorry, I just like that. All right, so we're in this use cache function, which is inside the schedule. Use cache. I kind of want to see. Yeah, it's only in the cache versions, which makes sense. But we saw that that's only created in here. I think what's bugging me here is this is a string, right? When we look up stuff in the container, this isn't a class name anymore. We're not doing any inheritance checks or anything like that. It's just a straight up string that is the class name. Which means that if you bind the event mutex into the container, you will only... I thought make always made it. No, it will resolve it. Okay. But ultimately, you'll get back an event mutex and not a cache event mutex. Now, having said that, this may be a non-issue because I honestly don't know where anyone is doing this. That is an interface, which is only implemented by cache event mutex. Okay. So ultimately, if you haven't defined your own your own implementation of the mutex, and registered it manually, that's the only time you're going to get into that situation, I believe. Otherwise, it'll create a cache one. Okay, that's fine. All right, so going back to our calling, where was it? In the kernel, right? We use the cache, so we're back in the schedule. Use cache. So we're just setting the store. As I said, that should be a string, I believe. Let's see here. What is this? Cache aware. So we want to be in the actual one. It'll just set it to the string. Okay. And then ultimately, presumably, that gets used. Yeah, so for locking and whatnot. I will say I'm not a huge fan of the way that Laravel sort of conflates caching and locking. And it does it ultimately because it uses your cache for storing locks. So I kind of get it, but they're not the same. Like, that's an implementation detail. A lock is nothing to do with caching, other than that is where you are storing like the existence of it. That has just kind of always bugged me. I think that lock should be its own sort of thing that gets injected a cache that it can use as its storage, or some sort of storage, whether it's a cache or not. It could also, and I think this is the thing, is because in Laravel cache can resolve to file, local, whatever you want to call it, to the disk. That's a thing, but you can't use real like mutexes, like system mutexes and stuff like that, which are sort of, I think, like POSIX type things that exist at like a kernel level. I guess I'm being a little naive here, but I know that that's a thing that does exist within the system that isn't like necessarily bound to the file system or whatever. So there's no cache that's going to use system mutexes, right? So yeah, anyways, it just means you can't use them, as far as I'm aware, within Laravel. And maybe you don't want to, but still, it's a thing. All right, so we're done using the cache. We've done our constructor right in here. Where here? So we've done the constructor. We've created our cache. We've done call, and now we are in the callback event. If it's not a string and isn't callable, then it's just invalid, right? That's fine. Otherwise, it will just set values. I kind of get thrown by sort of the old style assignments now instead of the constructor pull-up. Big fan of constructor pull-up, and I wonder if Laravel will make a concerted effort to migrate to that in maybe Laravel 12 or 13 or something like that. Okay, so we've done the first piece here, which is this call thing, which just creates a callback event, which is presumably returned. Let me just double check that. Yeah, so it returns the callback event, which means it doesn't do anything, right? It's just sort of memory-based storage of what we're attempting to do. And then we have every minute, right? Interesting. All right, so splice into position. This is presumably creating cron. Yeah, these are cron formats, which I find interesting that that Laravel is like creating crons. Which then it presumably has to parse to do the thing. And I wonder if there's just a library that they're depending on and they didn't want to implement it. All right, so every minute. And this is going to return the manager's frequencies. Okay. And yeah, there's this cron function call down here. It splits it. Yeah, okay. So it's going to split it on the space and then replace the value -1. So when you say it's in the first position, it's actually in the 0th position inside of that split string. So if you're not familiar with like cron syntax, it kind of looks like this, right? So typically it's 5 positions. So minute, hour, day, month, day of the week. So yeah, when you say it's going to run every minute, it's going to put it in the first position, which when you split on a space, means it's in the 0th position, right? So it's just going to set it and then implode it. So put it back together. And it can't just like replace the characters. It's actually quite a smart way to do it. Because if you saw here, there are some like this one here, right? So quarterly 1-12/3, right? There's some that are not just single integers. So yeah, I think this is a fine way to do it. And then it's going to call cron. So let's take a look at that. Takes the expression and returns still manages frequency. But this is a trait. So where does this live? Frustratingly, I want to see the use of this. We know it's not there. Here we go. So we are actually still in the... what is this event? Where did this come from? How does this get created? Call returns a callback event, which extends event. Okay, that makes sense. That's what I was expecting. Okay, so callback event is this thing, which has that manages frequencies in it, and then you notice nothing else happens, right? It doesn't. This doesn't actually execute the thing. So how does it get executed? Is the question, right? So let's see here. We should be able to see it in, I think, the console kernel. So how do we execute the schedule? Let's find out where this is called. Nowhere. Okay. I wonder if it is a bootstrapper. No, I don't think so. Take a look over here. I thought there was this schedule function. This schedule, which is this, like it's here. Define the application's schedule command. Well, that is less useful. It doesn't do anything, so there must be another implementation somewhere. Well, we know it's inside schedule, so hang on. Does this then have a schedule command? It does not. There's an exec, though. No, we know that. That's how we defined it. So you can, if I remember correctly, maybe you need on queue here. I know that you can set the queue so it'll actually fire off a job. But I can't remember how to do that. Let me see if I can quickly find that in the source. Queue. Scheduling queue jobs. Okay. It just calls job. Okay, so hang on, let's go back into here. Job. Right here, right? Yeah, I'm not entirely sure where this is going to be called. It returns the event. So we have an event. Yeah, when does run get called? This is ultimately what we want. Let's see what this is. Okay, this is the magic. But I'm not sure where this is going to be used. So let's find... Oh, that's right. Okay. Sorry. My apologies. So, of course, we knew that we have to run schedule run. Like, we looked that up earlier. So, schedule run. So, this is that command. This is actually the artisan command that schedule run executes, right? So, within the handle function of this, is where we're going to look at the schedule, which is an instance of schedule, and get whatever is due. Right, so let's take a look here. So we're going to collect all of the events into a collection because it's an array otherwise. Filter, which should just give us the non-null ones, and then is due. So let's see if we can find out where that lives. I am going to... I think that's going to be on the event, right? So, nope. Let me see if I can find it over here. Exit ACK. Nope, not going to be on here. Okay. CD vendor Laravel ACK is due. All right, so it is on the event. Why did I not think it? Why did it not come up? What class is this? Scheduling event. Console scheduling event. I don't know why that didn't come up. Is due. There it is. Okay. All right. So is due. So this is going to decide whether or not the command should be run in this particular invocation of schedule run. So checks to see whether or not it runs in maintenance mode, and if it is down, or so if it isn't able to run in maintenance mode, but it is down for maintenance, then it doesn't run. That is, I think, something we can put here. Yeah, so runs in maintenance mode. We'll set that, so that'll run regardless of maintenance mode. I've never had a reason that I would want to do that, but there you go. And we'll go back to is due. So assuming we're not in maintenance mode and we are supposed to run it anyways, expression passes. I'm suspecting that this is going to, it's going to look at the cron expression. And it essentially is creating this cron expression class, which I'm curious if that is part of Laravel or another. Yeah, so this is, it's Dragon Man. Hey, Dragon Man Tank. Good friend of mine. So it will parse that expression, and then based on the current date, which is set to the correct time zone, it will determine if it is due. So can only be down to the second, or the 0th actually. So this really can only handle by minute, and then the sub-minute stuff must be something else. So get next run date. That ends. Where does that expression end? Right there. Right. So if the current timestamp to the minute is the same as the next run date of the thing that it's trying to execute, then it will return true. So that's where a lot of that limitation comes in. Now, again, it is based on the system limitation that cron only runs once a minute anyways. So we'll go back to here. I am curious where the sub-minute stuff is happening. But if it runs in the current environment, it will return true. I'm not sure where this gets called, presumably again. So runs... Oh, okay. So you could actually just say, like, only runs in staging. Which might be cool for, like, clearing out your testing databases or something, right? That's neat. So is do. So we're back to here. And then this gets called in schedule run command, right? That was where, yeah, do events. Sorry, I was trying to, yeah, we're back to here. So for all of the events that are due, and again, I still haven't seen anything for the sub-minute stuff. For each event, if it doesn't pass this filters pass, let's see what that is. Filters pass. Determine if the filters pass for an event. What are the filters? Okay, so this is the when stuff. Okay. So, yes, you can say, like, run every minute when something, right? So that's a thing. Filters pass, okay. So if we're in here, oh, no, it's not that's not the one we were in. I don't think. We were in handle. Sorry. Here. It doesn't know what event is, I believe, which is why it's not getting me to the right place. It will dispatch a scheduled task skipped. That's nice. So you know when it was skipped explicitly. If event on one server, run single server event, otherwise just run it. I'm not going to dig too much into this one. I'm going to assume that this is just using the mutexes ultimately to kind of do the thing. Okay, otherwise it's going to run the event. So get the summary for display. I don't know what that does. Just gets the description. Oh, you can set a description. That's nice. I'm just going to kind of see. Oh, remind me later. Sale artisan schedule list. Oh, because I need to be here. Yeah, testing. Cool. Okay, and it also tells me when it's next due. All right. Back over here. If it's a callback event, it's going to use the summary as the command name? Otherwise, it's going to use, okay. I don't know how we don't have a callback event. I mean, this is calling the PHP binary. So let me take a look at the docs for that. Yeah, I'm not sure how we would end up in that situation. Oops. But okay. The description running whatever in the background, if it is running in the background. And then it's going to create a task. What is this? I need to know where that goes. It's a view component. That's kind of what I was thinking. It's not actually. So this is the output, the UI of running schedule work, and then it will dispatch a scheduled task starting, and then it will call run. Should skip due to overlapping, so that's going to go into the mutexes and see. Then it will start it and then finish it if it's not running in the background. Okay. And this just does a Symfony process. Right, that's Symfony, I believe. Okay. I didn't see where it would put stuff in the background. Oh, okay. If this is going to wait for it to finish. And then, no? No, it's not. That's interesting. I don't know how it knows to run in the background. Let me just go back here. So, run in background. Okay. Well, that's fine. Oh, that's because it's a callback event, which it would not be. Let me see if I can figure out where the other event is and how we get there. It's the only one that exists. Okay. So it is possible to mark that as running background. Oh, so there's some overlap here, right? So if we look at, let's get rid of this here and pull this up. Yeah, so there's a run here. Yeah, I'm still not sure where, because we're in the event. Let me go back to running background and see if I can figure out. That's just part of the string. And then there's it's just creating strings around this. I'm not sure where it decides that it's going to run in the background. Hold on. Okay, this is where it's happening. So essentially, it is going to, redirect output and add the ampersand on I guess Linux type or Unix type systems, or on Windows, it's going to do this, whatever this is, like the Windows equivalent, right? So, okay. Don't know how I missed this build command. Where did this get called? Oh, it's the very first argument. Okay, that's where it's happening. So, yes, when execute is called in start, it will call build command, which will then either be in the background or not. And then ultimately, where was the... Yeah, here. So, it's a little abstracted out, but that's fine. So start will call ultimately the build command, which put in the background based on this flag, and then this will, like, I guess exit code could be empty. What could it be? Because you wouldn't get an exit code. It says int. It would be, I think, 0 as long as it was successfully backgrounded. And then it'll finish it, right? So that's fine. What's interesting is it doesn't remove the mutex, and I wonder where that will happen if it is backgrounded. So it isn't. So maybe those two things are mutually exclusive. You cannot have without overlapping and background tasks at the same time. Which kind of makes sense. I'm not really happy about that, but I mean, I can kind of see it saying, well, once you background it, we don't have any way to track it anymore, so we can't do overlapping, right? Like we can't do overlap checking, but that's what the mutex is for. That exists outside of the context of the backgrounded task. But the problem is there's no way in the background task. Like, we don't come back and check on it, so there is no way to remove the mutex. So I would actually assume that I'm actually surprised that there isn't a check against backgrounding here. That would be my expectation. Let's see where this leads. No, I'm not sure. But as I read the code, there is no sane way, without like ending up in a deadlock, of using background jobs and non-overlapping. And I'm not sure why you would, honestly. Like, the background jobs are just meant to be kind of fire and forget, so that's fine. So maybe it's just something people haven't run into, and therefore it's not a problem. But I feel like you could get yourself into a bit of a pickle there. Also interesting to me is that this scheduled task finished will always run, even if it's backgrounded. Which then would only be reporting whether or not it was able to background, not whether or not the task itself was successful or not, or how long that took, I should say. I think the event is going to have that status code in it, but yeah. So ultimately it's doing a loop in here that will go over everything that is due and execute it. I did want to see if I can figure out background event. The sub-minute events. So we're going to go over here and let's look at the docs for this, because I'm not sure how we schedule them. Sub-minute scheduled task. There we go. Every second. So my suspicion is that this excuse me, doesn't go through the same process. So every minute does this splice into position with the cron, right? This does not do that. So all of these sub-minute things doesn't use the cron at all, which is what I was expecting. Okay, so if 60 modulus however many seconds does not equal 0, they're not evenly. I don't know why that's an exception, but I guess if you pass in a non-integer, because it isn't actually type hinted, I guess. Oh, interesting. Schedule the event to run multiple times per minute. All right, well, let's see what repeat seconds does. So that was the repeat stuff that I saw. Is repeatable, should repeat now. And that then gets called in repeat event. Sorry. Okay, so we're kind of at the end of where we were, right? So this was that whole running the things that are due right now, and then at the end of it, it checks to see where was that is repeatable here. So if the event is repeatable, so if repeat seconds is not null, so I wonder if there's a two events. We know due events filters on is due. How do we get to due events is going to call is due on each one here. So is due. And we know that this only goes down to the minute. So does that mean we get our first iteration here because of this? I believe so. I think that is what's going to happen, is anything that is sub-minute has to be included in this event. We know that because it's down here, right? And so what that means is that when we for each over events, it's going to include those sub-minute events, sub-minute scheduled tasks. So the first iteration is here. And then it will check to see if any of them additionally are repeatable, which is based on whether or not how many seconds it can. So is repeatable, just checks to see if repeat seconds is set. So that's how frequently or how infrequently it runs. And then it will run this repeat event. So it will check to see if it has any. You know what? I wonder if, honestly, given that this would just return empty if is repeatable is false for everything, this is completely unnecessary. That is a waste of a loop. Because this contains, right, is the higher order proxy stuff. So it's going to iterate over all of the events and call is repeatable, presumably until one of them returns true. So maybe I mean, at least it short circuits, Whereas this would have to call it on all of them. But I still think that I would just put this. Anyway, so it will then call repeat events. So this is now on all the sub-second stuff. And then, yeah, it will just, it's got a while loop that will run till the end of the current minute. And then for each of them, if it should interrupt, which I don't know what that is. Oh, right. Okay, so there was I saw that interrupt here. So specifically, there's this schedule interrupt, which will interrupt the execution of sub-minute tasks. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so the purpose of this is when you are deploying any sub-minute tasks that are currently running. So an instance of schedule run that is already running will continue to run until the previously deployed code, because it's in memory, right? And for the rest of that minute. So to interrupt it, there is this schedule interrupt thing, which is nice. Arguably necessary. Yeah, so that just aborts completely out of repeat events with this return here. Should repeat now. So this is on the individual event. Okay, and last checked. I'm pretty sure. Should repeat now. Nope. Where's this being called? Here. How does it know? Is that also setting it? No, it isn't. And that isn't. Where does this get set? Here. Okay, so inside of the repeat events, it'll check for maintenance mode on every iteration, and if it's not supposed to run in maintenance mode, it will continue. Now, interesting, that is a continue, and that makes sense because other tasks may be able to run in maintenance mode, but it also means that if maintenance mode goes on and then back off again during the minute, it will pick it up later. And then this here, so if the filters pass, it will skip it, which I think means, no, it wouldn't get down here. So sub-minute tasks will not emit a skipped for each second or whatever, however many times it goes through this loop, that it gets through there. But the filters pass is where the date time is set for this check here. So last checked is done in the filters pass. You can see that right here. So assuming that the filters do pass, we move down onto here, and this is the same thing that we saw earlier in the regular events stuff, where we run it on a single server or we run the events. And then it sleeps for, what is that, 1 millisecond? 100 milliseconds? Because these are picoseconds, right? Microseconds. Is that also a name for picoseconds? I don't know. Milliseconds. Don't know how to do milliseconds. Is 100 seconds. That can't be right. because that's more than a minute. Microseconds. I don't know why I thought microseconds is 100 milliseconds. Okay. I'm not sure that I would have this sleep in here. I get it, like you don't want it to run away on the server, but I imagine that the reliability of these events is a little less than great. Mostly what I mean by that is if you have a dozen sub-minute events, and each one of them takes 100 milliseconds, you're going to overflow the minute. And then the latter ones just will not get executed. And I mean, that's ultimately a risk no matter what. Now, having said that, they will get executed at least once in that minute. So there is that. We know that because of the handle function. We said this loop will execute the sub-minute events at least once. So they'll get executed at least once per minute, but may not get repeated. And that's going to depend on how many tasks that you have. And I think it might be interesting okay, they will get run at least once, because this for each is inside, right? So, yeah, okay, so they would each run at least twice then, so once during the main event loop, and then once, assuming that we didn't happen to run right towards the end of the minute, during this loop. But there's no guarantees that they'll run actually every second, every 2 seconds, whatever. And I think it would be interesting to be able to throw an event that says we didn't get to X number of events because something took too long, right? And I don't know if that is... There is a way to figure it out, kind of ahead of time. Like, based on the intervals, we can say this event should run X number of times within the minute, right? We should be able to do that. And if we don't hit those counters, then we know, hey, these events didn't execute because something else took too long. But I think maybe realistically what there probably should be is a slow events measure in here of some kind. Now, Laravel did announce they're bringing out some sort of metrics tool. I can't remember what it was called. They announced it at Laracon AU last week. This is the kind of stuff that I would like to see being put into a metrics platform. Is that these sub-minute events have to execute within a certain amount of time. And that amount of time is variable, right, based on the number of sub-minute events that you have, right? Because they're executing essentially every second. Well, we said every 100 milliseconds, but the minimum interval is every second. And so, ultimately, you have to divide every second by the number of events that you have to give you the amount of time that each of those events can take. Probably the two things. One is these should probably be dispatched into a job queue rather than. But I mean that's a lot of jobs too. But that's kind of the only one of the easiest ways to guarantee sort of constant runtime. Yeah, interesting. I've never had to use sub-minute events. If anyone has, please let me know. I'd love to know what you were using them for. Um, but ultimately, did you find them reliable? Did you find them consistent? Um, and was that sort of bound to sort of periods of time, right? So while the number of jobs and the workloads that they did were consistent, then the executions were consistent. But as that changed over time, as you added more jobs or the workloads changed, did the consistency change, right? So you might be running essentially the same code for 6 months or a year, and then you make some changes, but you don't do it for another year. So for the first year, they're consistent for that year, and for the second year, they're consistent for that year, but between years, they're not consistent, right? So anyways, I'd love to hear people's experiences on that. At this point, we are over time, so I do appreciate everyone sticking around. As a reminder, we went over today configuration and took a brief look into managers. There wasn't a lot to do there. And then we jumped forward to the scheduler. So next week, we will look into queues, bus, and jobs. As I said, that could be quite a lengthy topic. I may see if there's a sane way to break that up a little bit more. I don't think so, though. They're all very interrelated. And I suspect we can get a very meaningful discussion within the 2 hours. And you know, maybe there'll be sort of deep dives later. But we can time box that to 2 hours. So, yeah. At this point, thank you again. Appreciate always your time. I know that it's precious. Have a great rest of your week, and hopefully I will see you again next Tuesday, same Twitch stream, same time, which is 10 a.m. Pacific. If you have any questions, reach out. I do have my socials, and they'll be on the stream at the end. So do reach out. Happy to answer questions. And as I said, I will. So Den 31337. I will look to publish the original stream and presumably last week's now onto YouTube. So if you reach out to me wherever you found out about this, I will link you to those. I don't know how long that upload's going to take, but I'll make sure those get up onto YouTube. And this is ultimately going to become sort of a more polished series. And this is mostly just me rubber ducking through the content. So I do appreciate you letting me do that. Have a good one, y'all.